Hi everyone, welcome to Watercolour Bites. In this episode we're going to take a quick look at a narrated time-lapse version of a recent watercolour I did of a rhino. Let's go. Thanks for joining me everyone, my name's Tom, and in this episode I'm just going to quickly talk you through a recent Zoom demonstration I did of a watercolour rhino. I've been doing a lot more of these Zoom demonstrations and there's going to be plenty more to come. Please check the description to see links to more of those. In this particular video I just wanted to talk you through trying to keep things very simple. We've got what could be a very complex subject with lots of wrinkles and all sorts of other different things going on. But as usual, I'm kind of looking for a simple shadow area and a simple light area. And in this one in particular, I was really trying to force myself to have a lot of fun with the paint, let it kind of do its thing. Also, one thing I want to talk about is stepping away from such literal colour. Hopefully you'll see at the end of this painting that we do end up with a subject that kind of has a feel of the sort of literal colour of the rhino. But actually when we look at it, I've used lots of more unusual colours or less literal colours that aren't actually in the subject, or maybe I've stolen them from the subject and exaggerated them somewhat. So I'm going to quickly talk you through the drawing, the materials, and then we're going to dive into a narrated time-lapse. Okay guys, so materials. Starting kind of top left of the palette, I've obviously got a lot of colours out, but the ones I actually use for this particular painting are the phthalo blue, which is the lovely cool blue. It's very strong and powerful, but it makes lovely greens and turquoises, and when mixed with a red, because it's so opposing to a red, we get those beautiful rich darks. I've also got my ultramarine blue out, which is the softer blue. It's going to give us more gentle purples and kind of a slightly softer colour to use. Then have quinacridone red, which is my lovely cool red. It's very similar to alizarin crimson. Again, because it's cool, it's going to give us lots of beautiful purples, and it's also going to help create some deep darks along with the phthalo. I do have a more orangey warm permanent red out, which I don't use much. You don't necessarily need it for this particular one, but it's kind of there on the palette, and I dip into it to help get even deeper darks with the phthalo. The other main colours that I use are the Aussie Red Gold by Daniel Smith. Again, it's just a convenience colour. You can mix something very simple using quinacridone red and a warm yellow, or even burnt sienna, or anything in that warm ballpark. But it's a beautiful, transparent, vibrant, kind of goldy colour. I also have a new gamboge yellow, which creeps in at the odd time, but not hugely. That's the warmer yellow. And then the more dominant yellow in this particular painting is the cooler yellow, which gives us lovely, vibrant greens, which is aureolin yellow. And then I do have an opaque colour called Lavender by Holbein. I love having this particular colour, not to really use it in my mixes, but I tend to splatter it, as you'll see, into darker mixes as they're drying to create kind of texture and a bit more interest. Brush wise, I've got my absolute favourite, which is the Escoda Ultimo size 18 mop brush. Because it's a mop, it holds tons of water, loads of pigment. It's faux squirrel hair, so it's beautifully soft and really lively, but it also comes to a really fine point. I tend to use this for the larger washes. I then scale down to a size 0 Jackson's Raven mop. Again, it's faux squirrel hair, so it's lovely and soft and lively. It holds loads of water and pigment, but it's that little bit more controllable, comes to an even finer point. And then the slightly springier Pro Art Proline brush. It's a little bit stiffer. It doesn't hold as much water or pigment, and because of the stiffness, it's a little bit easier to control. It's great for detail, and it's great for slightly more dry brush work and kind of expressive small brush strokes towards the end of the painting. So I'm working on cold press paper. It gives it, just for me, a little bit more texture, and I like that. It helps the paper stay wet a little bit longer, especially when it's cotton paper like this. And the texture for me gives a little bit more broken brush stroke and a little bit more interest, which I personally like. In terms of the drawing, as usual, we're starting with the biggest shape. So looking at the rhino's head, in many ways just a rectangle at an angle. Obviously it's more complicated than that and more interesting than that, but that's kind of where I start. And the biggest thing is how deep is that rectangle relative to how long it is, and that's the start point. Once I've got that basic proportion right, then I start to chisel away and add things on to the overall kind of shape. Then after that, then start to break it up into smaller shapes, as well as sticking the other small shapes onto it, like the horn, the ears, the two horns, and all of that sort of thing, kind of sticking those on top afterwards. Then we start to place the features, as always using kind of vertical and horizontal lines to help place things. So if, for example, I was to draw a line horizontally across from the place where the two horns kind of meet, I get to the eye. If I was to draw a vertical line up or drop one down from just inside the front edge of the ear, I get to the eye. So all of these things can help you kind of triangulate or place the features. Quite often, mouth, nostril area, eye and ear are all in some sort of line, and if you look here, they are very much in a line from ear to eye down to nostril, mouth area. So that can be something to really look for. And as always, the tilt or the angle of these particular shapes is important. That's what gives the character and the gesture of the animal, along with the proportion. Very finally, we would place, or what I tend to do is look for the line of light and shadow. And this can make the drawing look sometimes more complex. But what we're doing here is, for example, from the ear down to the eye, there's this line kind of jagging in and out. That line is not the features, it's the line between light and shadow, the most dominant one when I blur my eyes, and there's a few of those lines. So what this helps me do is really understand this simple pattern of light and shadow that I'm looking for. Everything kind of right of the line, apart from the odd bit of dappled light, is in shadow, and if I blur my eyes, it's predominantly the same sort of tonal value. So I know here I can get away with letting the colours really drift together, playing a lot with the colour, as long as all the tonal values are fairly close together. Similarly, I'm probably going to leave everything left of the line as either a very, very light colour, or most likely actually just the white of the page, to create a really strong abstract feeling of light and shadow. And the subject itself may appear complex in places, but actually when we blur and squint our eyes and look for this simple pattern of light and shadow, it becomes much, much simpler, much, much easier to understand, and as a result, much, much easier to paint. Let's dive into the painting and have a look. So I'm kicking off with a bit of Aussie red gold and a bit of quinacridone, and we're just going to lay in a very simple shape of shadow, starting very light. So we're working with kind of a tea consistency of paint, lots of water but also a good amount of pigment, and I'm basically just mapping out light and shadow, keeping it light, letting all the colours flow together, leaving lots of whites of the page, erring on the side of lighter than we might think, with more whites of the page than we might think, because we can always go darker and we can always get rid of the lights. And I'm working on a slight tilt here, so you can see the bead has collected at the bottom of the wash. As long as that bead remains wet, I can kind of pick it up and continue to wash down the page, just adding more colour as I'm going. So I'm adding loads of different colours here, like purples, Aussie red gold, oranges, even yellows and greens down towards the bottom, stronger purples. Now that the wash is beginning to dry, I'm adding in this more concentrated mix of maybe kind of full fat milk consistency of the ultramarine, and the quinacridone is giving us that beautiful purple, and kind of dropping that in. Always remembering that our colours will dry lighter and also not as intense as we put them down. So I'm really erring on the side of really strong, bold colour, focusing on trapping the light. So you can see I've already created a very strong pattern of shadow, which takes up a large percentage of the rhino, but I've left lovely light colours and whites of the page. And now we're going to start pushing those shadows darker. So the phthalo blue with a bit of aureolin and a touch of red is giving us this lovely dark turquoise. That's more of a single cream consistency that I'm now dropping into a damp wash. As the wash continues to dry, we need to up the consistency of paint to stop getting too many runs or cauliflowers, and to make the paint kind of work. That stronger consistency of paint is also starting to push the tonal value darker. So within this large area of shadow that represents the majority of the rhino, within that large area of shadow, the tonal values are quite close together, but there are darker areas and darker accents within them. This is when I'm now going in with these darker, more concentrated mixtures. The really dark areas are probably double cream consistency of paint, where the slightly more melted but still slightly darker areas are more of the single cream consistency of paint. So as usual, it's all about understanding the amount of pigment in the brush and the amount of water in the brush, along with the kind of the stage of drying that the wash on the page that you're working into is at. And effectively, there's kind of a process here, however you follow it, is that we start light and I'm going progressively darker, i.e. getting progressively thicker with the consistency of paint, getting smaller and smaller with the shapes that I'm creating. I've now dropped down to my size 10 brush, and I'm pushing in a really deep, rich dark of almost neat paint, probably like double cream, even Marmite consistency of phthalo blue with a red, which gives us an almost black colour. And whilst the wash is nearly dry, it's still got a moistness to it, and I'm dropping in these little dark accents. And the joy of using the thicker paint with a nearly dry wash is we will still get lovely melting of the paint, a lovely kind of soft wet into wetness in places, but we will still get a little bit more definition. It won't completely disappear into the surrounding wash. So the trick here is that I'm holding on to my pattern of light and shadow. I need to reserve everything in the light area, keep a lovely mid-tone, which I've already laid down for the shadow area, and now for the first time I'm starting to push in the second layer on top of the already dry under layer. Very much about creating a simple mid-tone, even though I'm variegating the colours. So I moved from phthalo blue and a more greeny mix into a more blue mix, then down into a more quinacridone red mix in this area behind the ear. That red then allowing me to move into orange. All of those tonal values are the same, even though I'm varying the colours greatly. I'm now dropping in some little bits of quinacridone red into the drying wash just to create some texture, just to create a variety of colour. But within this area of tone, or tonal value, that is very much the same, or at least very close together, that's what allows us to play around with paint. And it's the paint consistency that is very similar within these areas. I'm now going to take exactly the same paint consistency and the same sort of mixture I used behind the ear and on the shoulder, and I'm going to take that into the horn, because the horns are in shadow slightly more than the rest of the area, more like the area behind the ear. So if I use the same mixture and the same paint consistency, I know it's going to be the right tonal value, and it's a great way to simplify the subject because I'm using the same shadow tone on the horn as I am on other areas of the rhino. So this is what we might call a darker mid-tone. So we've got the white of the page, we've got the initial lighter mid-tone that I laid down at the start. We're now working with a darker mid-tone and also the deep rich darks as well, and I'm just keeping the tonal values incredibly simple. Although the horn has variety of value and colour within it, they're all in the rough ballpark, they're all in the same sort of tonal value boundary. Nice tight tonal values allows us to play around with the paint, allows us to do what we want, but we're holding on then to the simple and strong pattern of light and shadow. That's what's going to make the painting work. How we choose to use the colour within those simple tonal values, that's where we can bring in our own kind of personal twist, our own expression, and we can very much step away from the literal colour completely. We still know what this subject is. It's very clear it's a rhino. We still have a strong pattern of light and shadow. We even have a gentle illusion of it maybe having some sort of local colour, but yet when we really look at it, it's a massive myriad of loads of different colours. And just to reiterate, that's because the tonal values are simple, and when I create a large area of similar tonal value, that's when I can variegate the wash by dropping in lots of different colour. I can start with pink at the top of the horn and use a similar paint consistency to bring it down towards blue and add more yellow to create more of a green colour. But yet when we blur our eyes, all of those tonal values are roughly the same, so it holds together. And that's the big thing I wanted to get across here, is simple patterns of light and shadow, as fewer tonal values as possible, using tonal values to simplify areas, and then within those areas that have been simplified and unified by similar tonal values, that's when we can break away and have lots of fun with colour. If we haven't got the simple patterns of light and shadow and strong patterns and simple tonal values kind of underpinning what's happening in the painting, and then we start to try and use all these different exciting bright colours, generally it's not going to hold together. We can do that in areas, but it's not going to hold together that well. And then very finally, I'm dropping in that lavender opaque colour into the drying dark wash and a little bit into the drying wash of the horn, just to create a bit more variety, a bit more texture, a bit more variation of surface texture, which is something I like to do with watercolour. And that's it, guys. If I blur my eyes, there is a level of complexity, but actually those values are so simple. There's only really 4 of them: a light, 2 midtones and a dark, and that allows us to do what we want then with the colour. That's it guys, I hope you enjoyed it. Let's get into the outro. I love painting rhinos. I think they're really fun. I love the way they have this really blocky, chunky feel to them. They've got this amazing form, and then the way the light falls across the form, whatever direction it's coming from, I think is really interesting. They do give a great opportunity to have large areas of kind of similar or even the same kind of tonal values, big large areas of light and shadow. So for me it's an opportunity to really let the paint flow and do its thing, which is what we looked at in this. Don't forget, if you're enjoying these videos, please do consider subscribing. Hit the notification bell, there's going to be loads more to come. If you think others will like this, please feel free to share on social media. And until next time, happy living, happy painting, and I will catch you soon.